Jesus, don't keep any of this in the podcast, Alex. I'm begging you. I sound like such a fucking idiot. Welcome, everyone, to House of Bards. We are a podcast about Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop role-playing games, the airy-fairy shared narrative storytelling side of it. And I am Bethany, and this is Alex.
Greetings, everybody.
Today's subject is magic versus technology. I don't know if we've alluded to this before, but we've been wanting to do this episode for a while.
I'm fairly certain, actually, that it did. It turned up at least once last episode.
Yeah.
Or whichever episode was immediately after us having all of those technical difficulties we alluded to. Like, this was planned from a while back, like pretty much since episode 2.
Yeah. This has been one we've been wanting to do for a while.
So I thought that since you had episode 2, which was technology, and then 3 episodes later in episode 5 you had magic, then this one, episode 8, should be magic versus technology. So
yeah,
you got a little bit of pattern in continuity there.
And there are settings that play more with this as a major theme than perhaps Dungeons and Dragons does, and we'll probably talk about them in a bit. But essentially, magic versus technology, it's themes about really science versus nature, the progress of man versus naturalness in the world, because magic's normally
but
a
it's
natural
also,
thing.
It's a number of other things, and it really depends on the work that it's turning up in.
Yeah.
Like one of I think the biggest arguments for magic versus technology as a trope is that it's symbolic of this idea of old traditions centered in a culture very much in its elders.
Yeah.
Being set up as oppositional to new progressive behaviours, which are centred not in the very young, but in like the reasonably young and the early middle-aged.
Yeah.
And of course, like as the technology starts advancing faster, then the particular demographic who hold the most perceived control get younger and younger.
Yeah.
Honestly, the reason why I think this particular trope turns up so much, because actually I'm going to split this right open as to you may be wondering, what is a particular verdict on this trope? I do not like magic versus technology. I think it's a lazy, boring trope that has ruined more than its fair share of fantasy universes that could otherwise have been quite interesting. But I do see why it keeps turning up, because it's symbolic for this very sort of central conflict to what a lot of more modern fantasy writers, and honestly a huge number of science fiction writers, have been plagued by. I mean, one of the first science fiction books ever was Frankenstein, which
it was, yes.
You have been reading, haven't you?
I have been reading, yeah. I think I've mentioned it to you that I do not like this book. I've really been trying to like this book, but I just hate all of the characters. Victor Frankenstein makes such bad decisions. Own up to what you fucking did, mate. I can't even with this anywhere. But yes, I have been reading it, and there is some definite strong themes of not necessarily magic, but
no, but like the stuff
yeah.
behind that particular fear is this whole idea that new technologies progress too fast, and they risk overwriting old received wisdom and morality and the culture of people. I must say, by contrast, I love Frankenstein. I think as a work of classic literature, it has aged incredibly well for how old it is. And it's very engaging. And also, if you actually read the book, then you get a reason for why you do that thing about, like, correcting people about, well, actually, Frankenstein was a doctor, rather than just sort of being a knob for no particular reason. Like, if you read the book, they are actually, like, very distinct and different characters with, like, completely opposing goals. It's not a case of, like, Frankenstein is the doctor up until the monster turns up and then the monster is, the star of the show. It's not. Read Frankenstein.
If only it were that, God.
Like, honestly, I think that would be weaker. Like, it is basically, like, Beth is right, it's basically a book full of Victor Frankenstein making incredibly poor decisions, being punished for his incredibly poor decisions, and then, in reaction to that, making even worse decisions.
At least tell someone what you did. At least do that.
Just
then maybe
have a fucking chat with the monster. Like,
just
don't be a knob.
I mean, he's having a chat with the monster now, and it's like
It doesn't go well. It's
like
not
at the point where I'm at, he's like, and it's just it doesn't go well, and it goes on forever as well. While the monster just says, "My life is so fucking sad." And, like, I assume he's trying to be like, don't you see what pain you have wrought on me? Totally understand that, monster, he totally has. But then Victor Frankenstein's just like, I don't care, I'm out of here! Like, though, to be fair with, Frankenstein, it's not actually new technology that makes Victor Frankenstein make the monster. It's old writings of, like, old scientists who thought they could do this, not new scientists. Which I think is very interesting.
Yeah, but there's still, like, a lot of thematic...
Yeah.
Like, science advances too fast. Like, that's the whole... And this is actually a thing that really pisses me off about, like, modern horror and sci-fi, is that because that was, like, the grounding, the rooting of the genre...
Yeah.
Like, there's a whole lot of, like, hand-wringing inherent in modern sci-fi that's pretty much completely baseless. Yeah.
In fairness to Mary Shelley, I think she presents
I don't blame Mary Shelley because at the time, like, the cultural landscape with regard to how science was progressing was completely different. Engineering as well.
Yeah, like, and I think and it's not like she doesn't present Victor Frankenstein as this science-wielding mad scientist charlatan. She's largely very sympathetic to him and also to other characters who want to make progress in technology. She's not Michael Crichton, who is a grumpy old man who yells at clouds. Like, she's not that.
Honestly, I think, like, to her audience, she got through pretty well.
Yeah.
It's because at the time, of course, that was playing a lot of people's fears, and they, like, I don't know if a huge number of them were against the idea of scientific progress entirely. It's just all of them were very frightened about what men of science, because it was largely men of science, I don't think it was exclusively, but that was the landscape at the time, were sort of doing without any real kind of goal or restriction or anything like that.
I think to some extent, like, people who don't know anything about science are still worried about that. Because I think we all remember the Large Hadron Collider, and everyone was like, it's going to make a black hole, and it's like, you don't know anything about science at all, so please be quiet.
Yeah, but, like, now people generally base those fears in the lack of knowledge that they have.
Yeah.
Whereas at the time, there was still, like, this real fear that the very desire for acquisition of knowledge was in and of itself dangerous and sinful. Like, not completely, but the extent to which it was being taken by philosophers and men of science was, like, in some way incredibly dangerous. Which, to be honest, if you, like, are basically allowed to experiment without any real restriction on what you're doing, it might be. I feel like, although this started being on topic, we've maybe veered off a little bit.
I don't know, I think, like, these are all necessary background things to discuss about this.
There's no magic in the story of Frankenstein. It is...
No.
Like, it perhaps takes a little bit of your willing suspension of disbelief to believe that Frankenstein's experiment actually works, but there isn't any, like, actual magic in it. So in this case, the magic is, like, the system around which the, like, pre-scientific culture is predicated, if you like.
Yeah.
And that's the way that magic is portrayed in quite a lot of fictional settings. Generally less so in games like Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
But often, like, magic is shown to be, like, the form of power that is, like, very attuned with nature and history and tradition, and is sometimes a stand-in for, like, the self-sufficient traditions of non-industrialized societies, which... Oh shit, now we're going to get onto, like, the subject of white people fucking everything up again. So that's why I think, like, this subject of magic versus technology turns up so much. It's basically a way of emphasizing a conflict that was culturally important, but which, without some sort of embellishment of one of the sides, technology is always going to win.
Yeah. Except in Power Rangers Zeo, where magic wins in the end, kind of.
Are you going to drop this early?
I mean, I guess.
Okay. Beth,
Right.
please explain how Power Rangers is relevant to the topic of this podcast.
Okay, well, obviously in Mighty Morphin, anybody who's seen Mighty Morphin Power Rangers will know that it was definitely kind of vague science versus magic, and in the end science won in that series, but then some stuff happened, Rita kind of got a one-up on them, and, then, like, Lord Zed pops out. Lord Zed, not a lot of people know this, was invented for purely just the American TV show, so anything you see with, like, Lord Zed in Power Rangers, completely new footage. Anyway.
The production of Power Rangers is so fucking weird.
It is. I don't know how they do it half the time, because
it's honestly the most fascinating component of the entire show as a cultural concept.
Yeah, anyway, okay. So Lord Zed is like, he's very much technology based, and he actually like looks like this kind of weird, gross kind of monster. He's a very American design monster, and I think that's how you can tell he was kind of an original thing for the American broadcast. Anyway. But he's very technology based. All his enemies are suddenly technology based, as opposed to Rita's, who were magic based. And then you have the Power Rangers, and the Power Rangers in Zeo are magic based. Like, that's where they get their powers from. I'm pretty sure this is right anyway. I could get this completely wrong, and someone went, actually, Beth, it's the other way around. What the hell are you talking about? But I'm fairly certain they're magical. They're magic powered in this.
I talk like a load of stuff coming out of my mouth on this podcast all the time, and I think, well, some of this kind of sounds like bullshit. I kind of hope I'm not just talking out of my ass. Hell, there's like 2 people who I ask about it on Tuesdays.
Yeah.
Generally, so far, I have been at least vaguely correct enough on all the historical stuff.
Yeah, no, but I mean, like, with like history and geography, everyone's like, well, Beth kind of sounds like she knows what she's on about, but like pop culture stuff, I'm expected to actually know this
you
stuff.
You don't know the point of like Beth geography that I was exposed to last night.
Yes. It runs on its own internal logic, yeah. Anyway.
Suffice to say that Beth has only a fleeting grasp on how rivers work.
It's true, I don't know, like, I know they are a body of water that, like, kind of goes into the land somehow, and maybe ends up out at the sea, but
honestly,
like...
the most concerning thing about the map I was shown is that it implies that Beth does not understand the difference between fresh and salt water, and that makes me worry, like, how is she alive?
I don't know the difference. And doesn't it just, like, taper off into fresh water at some point? Surely, right? Jesus, don't keep any of this in the podcast, Alex. I'm begging you. I sound like such a fucking idiot.
Anyway, a long time ago, you were talking about the Power Rangers.
I was talking about the Power Rangers a long time ago. But in the end, in Zeo, and I think, weirdly, they're probably at their most powerful in Zeo. I'm not counting later series which didn't have the kind of quote-unquote original team in. So yeah, but Magic won in the end, kind of. And then they all turned into cars in Turbo and lost everything. And then they got sent into space, which is the best one. So, yeah, Magic won in the end in Power Rangers Zeo, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So
I don't know how
now we've established that Power Rangers can, like, divine, like, the outcome of the conflict we are discussing in either direction, depending on exactly what kind of story they want to tell.
Yeah.
Without any real, like, agenda.
Oh, yeah.
Then I think we can try and start to talk about... okay, why do I hate this trope so much?
Why do you hate this trope so much?
The thing is, like, pitting magic against technology makes a lot of sense, but it also makes no sense at all. It's very much dependent on generally the way that magic is predicated in society. Technology is more of a known quantity, being a thing that actually exists. So it tends not to like change so much. But here's my problem with magic versus technology. Well, okay, I have a lot of problems with magic versus technology. Here is one of them. It's really fucking boring. There is a game by Troika, which came out around the time that everybody was making top-down, well, not top-down, like isometric, angular top-down, pre-rendered RPGs. So, you know, Baldur's Gate and Icewind Dale and all that stuff. Well, Troika made the Temple of Elemental Evil and Arcanum. Arcanum was buggy as shit, but it had a pretty cool concept, which was that it was basically an epic fantasy setting that was undergoing its industrial revolution, which is really cool because it means that you can be like an elf or a dwarf or a gnome or a troll or whatever, but they're all dressing up in like Victorian fashions, and they have steam power, and they have like firearms to an extent, but they still like sometimes use hand arms and armor and that sort of thing. And central to the plot and the mechanics is this concept of magic and technology basically do not work in the presence of each other. So you can't combine the two effectively because they're just diametrically opposed, and that killed the excitement for me because I was like, oh god, not this shit again. It's not interesting because basically all of the stories that don't have a really tiresome agenda behind them about this concept have been told already. And so when you put that sort of thing into a game, then you're running up against, well, okay, all of the cool things that could have come about by combining these two concepts now can't happen. And on some level it makes sense, because of course there's a lot of like engineering and technology that relies on the laws of physics remaining fairly constant, and there's quite a lot of magic that relies on that not happening. So you can understand cases where like magic might prevent a technological device from functioning correctly. In the Rivers of London book series, which I do recommend that you read, even if I felt a bit weird when I found out the author was white, given some of the things that he says in the book. There's this thing where like you can't cast magic in the presence of things with silicon chips in it because it will vaporize the silicon, provided they're connected to electricity. So the really fun thing about Rivers of London is that the protagonist doesn't accept this. It's not just a case of like he is taken into the magical world and he discovers that he must leave the trappings of his technological life behind. He's like, no, fuck this. So he does like a whole lot of experimentation with magic, and then he like builds these devices that basically like operate like a catch mechanism to disconnect the batteries of his mobile phone so that he won't fry the chips of his phone every time he's doing magic. And that's the kind of protagonist I want in that kind of environment. He is a policeman, which I identify with less, I think, than I would otherwise have done. Although it's a really good series of books. Go and read Rivers of London, which is the first one. I can't remember what the others are called, but I think most of the editions they're printing now will have like pictures of the covers of the other books inside them, so it shouldn't be that hard to figure out. So yeah, that's the kind of thing that I want, because I just find it so much more interesting to see stories and games where those things can be combined. Which was why I was so disappointed in Arcanum, because I was like, you could have so many things. Cause like, well, in Dawnsomber there is a country called Relend. Well, it's kind of a country. It's a country in as much as it's a large area of land that is not owned by any other political entity, but it's basically like a collection of city-states that move around. If you've ever read Mortal Engines, it's like that crossed with Mad Max, but everything is made out of stone and powered by magic. But the reason why I made Relend is because I wanted like the technological faction, but I didn't want them to be completely arcanophobic, because Dawnsomber is a relatively high magic setting, and the idea of completely swearing off magic in a high magic setting where magic works in a fairly predictable and logical way seemed really silly. And honestly, like, that introduces a sort of your mileage may vary quality into the whole thing, because it's like, Or maybe in a low magic setting, then there aren't too many consequences of like swearing off magic for technology. And in a setting where magic is very, very unpredictable, combining the two doesn't generally go very well.
Yeah.
But honestly, like the way I see it is the way some of the tribes in Relend use technology and magic is that they will design some technological creation, and then at specified points in a controlled manner, they will use magic to basically fill inconvenient holes in the physical functioning of the design.
Yeah.
One of the fundamental laws of physics causing you a little problem in a particular place, sure, just bung in a looping spell right up in there and make sure it's contained, and you're fine. It's the cheating place. It's for people who do web dev in higher than jQuery frameworks. It's when you break down and use jQuery, hidden away in a very contained space. If you program primarily in jQuery, I am sorry. I don't, personally. But it's that kind of place where like the magic is controlled and it is like restricted, but they're not afraid to use it. And of course, I think there's probably also a faction in Relend that's just like, fix all problems with magic. Hold everything together with glamours and whatnot.
Yeah. I think Two Earth has, I think, a similar attitude, because Two Earth's like technically going through an industrial revolution. There are legitimately things like telegrams and railways and steamboats and stuff like that. But again, they fill in the bits they can do with like magic, and magic's really useful because you can transport things really quickly. Like, you need to build a train, you can build one a lot quicker with magic.
Yeah.
You know, but it's kind of, I'm sort of thinking about Will Wheaton's tabletop thing that he's doing at the minute, Titan's Grave, where it's sort of very high fantasy but also very like high concept sci-fi as well, which I find really interesting, because they'll go into places and they'll come across something, and in the concept art that they do for it, you're not entirely sure if it's a thing of science or if it's a thing of magic or if it's both, and I find that really interesting. The idea that these two things have formed together so completely that they're almost indistinguishable from one another, and they're kind of almost symbiotic, and I find that much more interesting than being like, on this side Gandalf and on that side Victor Frankenstein, who will win in their fight? Gandalf would win, obviously, but
yeah, probably.
Yeah.
But that's because like Victor Frankenstein is a whiny little knob.
Yeah.
And Gandalf gets shit done and is functionally immortal.
I know, yeah. I bet like Gandalf's buff as hell, and Victor Frankenstein's probably got like nothing as well. Like, Gandalf wouldn't even need to use magic. Gandalf could just like punch and knock out.
Gandalf could just beat him up.
Yeah. Yeah, why not?
Oh god. I think like maybe that's another reason why in settings that don't necessarily have an agenda to fill with the whole magic versus technology thing, they still come to blows, is because in many cases magic and technology tend to sort of fill the same ecological niche, if you like.
Yeah, yeah.
That a lot of the time, like you look at Harry Potter, quite a lot of things, particularly in the scenes in the Burrow, where you see a lot of the very domestic stuff going on, you will see that there's quite a lot of things that we, as Muggle people, use technology for, that are like, that niche is filled by magic in their world.
Yeah. But I mean, Harry Potter really frustrates me, because you get really cool shit like the flying car, right? And then you get to Hogwarts and it's like, technology's banned. Imagine how amazing Wizard TV would be, just for a second. Their photographs move, what can their TVs do? But we never find out, because apparently they're like, we don't need TV. I'm like, but
I think probably, like, bear in mind Harry Potter is set in the 90s, so, like, I presume that Wizard TV as well as Muggle TV would be significantly shitter at that point. Yeah. It might be in the Harry Potter universe now there is Wizard TV.
Oh, yeah.
I feel that, like, there's got to be, like, some kind of ripple in, like, Wizard experimentation just out from Arthur Weasley.
Yeah, well, I mean, because they have things like radios. Who brought radios into the wizarding world, right?
Well, the implication is that, like, magical radios are a skeuomorph, as in they're not actually electronic. They're just magical radios that behave like electronic ones. So maybe that's how they would do TV as well. It would be like they would take the basic concept, but then they would replicate it in magic.
Yeah. So and then you have they made Arthur Weasley made that car so much better though. Loads of space in the back for all his millions of children. Loads of space in the trunk for all his millions of luggages for his millions of children. And then more room in the front as well, and it can fly and turn invisible.
In this podcast, noted Harry Potter scholar Beth, Baroness Bamf of House of Bards, vastly overestimates the admittedly rather large number of children that Arthur Weasley has.
He does have a lot of children, to be fair. And I can totally understand. He looked at the car and was like, I cannot fit all of my children into this car, right? I can maybe get, Percy, the twins in, and Ginny if she squeezes in the middle, right? We've all been on that road trip. He went,
yeah.
This is no good. I'm going to have to make this bigger on the inside.
Is the car actually bigger on the inside, though?
It is bigger on the inside. Do you want me to get my copy of Chamber of the Secrets out?
I believe you, because there's quite a lot of other stuff that Arthur Weasley interacts with that is bigger on the inside, the tent at the Triwizard Cup.
Yeah,
it's not the Triwizard Cup. There was no tent at the Triwizard Cup. The Quidditch World Cup.
Quidditch Cup, yeah. See that tent, amazing. Although tent's technically not a modern invention, I suppose. But
not really,
whatever.
But then we get into that question for episode 2 about what actually is technology. This is also why technology versus magic is bullshit. There's no cut-off point between the old technology that magic is cool with and the new technology that it isn't.
Yeah.
I mean, at least Rivers of London was like, no, specifically silicon chips are the problem.
Yeah. You've got to be a bit more specific. I find that, I am going to just talk about the flying car, because it was one of those concepts as a kid that I went, this is amazing, I love fiction. And then nothing that cool ever shows up in Harry Potter ever again, apart from, maybe... no, nothing that cool ever showed up again. But I love that concept. So, why doesn't the train in Harry Potter fly? Imagine how cool that would be.
Well, the
and it never does.
That the train in Harry Potter is despite leaving from a station that doesn't actually exist, an actual train that goes across the actual countryside. So a flying train would perhaps not be as proof of that, Harry and Ron were able to fly the flying car out of London and then catch up with the train. So the train is not going through a parallel dimension or anything.
That's true. That is weird though, because is it in theory an abandoned line then? That as Muggles we see it as an abandoned train line?
Probably.
Because it can't obviously run on a normal train line, because then it would crash into another train.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
Cause delays. Unless, of course, everybody who works in the kind of train what do we call the people in this country who work with trains and train stations? I don't know.
Capitalist pigs.
Yeah, but anyway, those people.
Renationalised rail.
Anyway, the people who work on the railways, maybe they're all just in on it, and the masquerade is so high that even to obviously Harry Potter, they'd be like, I can't tell this kid where platform 9 3/4 is, because it would break the masquerade. He's got to figure it out for himself.
No, I don't agree with that at all.
No, obviously not. The more
I feel like it's an abandoned line idea is more likely, and especially since I do believe that we have enough abandoned railway across this country that conceivably could work. I don't know that that's a fact. I would have to speak to my friend Ellen, who knows a lot about transport and roads and rails and all of that stuff.
I think they probably would be abandoned lines and stuff like that, or again, as Muggles we can't see it or perceive it, which...
Well, I think there's bridges and shit on there, so it's we would see it as being run down and abandoned.
Yeah, I think that's probably
to be honest, probably only Muggles who would need to be in the know would see that. Because honestly, how many times have you seen a railway line and had no idea why it was there, where it's going, or where it comes from? Well, you're just oh well, this is a railway line. I presume that this is serving some place with people and or goods from another place.
That's true, actually. Yeah, they probably just don't fucking bother. Yeah.
But see, that's magic and technology working together.
Yeah.
Honestly, Arthur Weasley is pretty much the sort of hero figure for rejection of magic versus technology.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because he's actually willing to experiment, and he asks questions about things that he doesn't understand.
No, the man is a champion.
He
seriously.
approaches magic from, admittedly, not the best scientific perspective, but even so, he's he is willing to take the knowledge that he knows he doesn't have, and then use that as a fundamental basis for his magic. There was a lot of hoo-ha for a while over that one extra in the back of one of the films who is reading... Which of Stephen Hawking's books is it?
I don't know. I know which one you're on about, yeah.
Is it A Brief History of Time? Did Stephen Hawking
think
write
so,
that?
yeah.
I would have to look this up, but see, I didn't see a problem with that though, to be honest, because I'm like,
yeah.
If we posit that magic is a means by which the laws of physics don't generally happen, it's not always laws of physics. Sometimes it's like mind magic and stuff, but even then, that's like, depending on how it works, still altering the laws of physics somehow. If magic is that being forced not to work the way that doesn't mean that everything is bullshit in science.
Yeah.
It just means that science is like the control. Science is until you start interfering with it, this is how it works, and then it will stop working like that and work this way when you do magic. But you have to actually exert some kind of will on that.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's that weird that a wizard would want to know about that stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if in that particular universe it's entirely necessary, but you can definitely see him wanting to have that knowledge if he does a lot of experimentation with magic. Because I feel like having a grounding in the baseline of how the world works before you start messing with it, you can see somebody doing that just so that then they can, especially if they were doing things like inventing new spells, they'd be like, okay, what is it that I actually want to do, and how can that be achieved? How is the thing that I want not to be happening actually happening, and what would be the neatest way to stop that happening? What one thing should I try and change with this new spell? I don't honestly think that that's a very weird approach to magic at all. Certainly, I feel like there's a lot of mages in Dawnsombra who would approach it that way.
Yeah.
Maybe not all of them, and sorcerers, I think, might take a little more happy-go-lucky kind of approach. Although I am basing all of my presuppositions about sorcerers in Dawnsombra on Silas.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't know if it's a great idea for Silas to invent a spell. Honestly, I don't know if it's a great idea for Jay to invent a spell either, because it would probably be really weird and kind of discordant.
I think the spell that Jay would most like to create would be that spell would be something that would allow Jay to go back in time, retrieve multiple other Jays, and start a band together. That's the kind of spell Jay would like to create.
Until such a point as the original Jay is kicked out of the band by the other three Jays and replaced on drums by Silas.
Yeah, absolutely.
And other in-jokes from our game that we are putting into the podcast. Watch Steven Universe.
Watch Steven Universe.
That's relevant, I promise you. But yeah, I like that idea as to how magic works and how you can use an understanding of science and technology to fuel the understanding of magic in your setting. And it also means that there's no real conflict between them if you don't want there to be. It's a kind of thing where magic fixes the inconvenient problems in particular specific cases for magic, for science and technology, which otherwise work to their own consistent, if restricted, set of rules. And I honestly think that's great.
Yeah.
That's really good. I like the idea of engineers who can do magic. People who don't just stop once they're told, well, the rules of the magic prevent this from ever happening, the twain shall never meet, and actually attempting to fix this problem, to work around it. I'm very much invested in that idea, and it's sort of diametrically opposed to the idea of magic versus technology.
Yeah. I think
another setting where the forces of magic and technology are sometimes at each other's throats is the Shadowrun setting.
It is the Shadowrun setting. For those of you who don't know background information, once upon a time there was magic, and then there wasn't magic for a really long time, and life continued as normal, and then the magic came back. And that is the kind of premise that Shadowrun is set on.
Shadowrun is like basically the exact opposite of Arcanum in that it is a like normal, not fantasy world that becomes a fantasy world.
Yeah, but it's like also cyberpunk.
Era. Yeah, it's a very cyberpunk game, but it's this idea that like everybody starts sort of turning into like an elf or a orc or whatever. Well, not everybody, but a lot of people.
Orcs and trolls are become that way at puberty, whereas elves and dwarves are born, I think is the rule. Elves are born elves, and dwarves are born dwarves, but you can become an orc or you can become a troll. And of course, if you are one of these fantasy races, because you don't technically belong in the modern world, you can be allergic to things that exist in the modern world, like plastic or iron or something else. And you can have anything from like a light allergy to a severe, like deathly allergy. Like, you know, you touch iron and you take, you know, mortal damage until you're dead, basically. Whereas, you know, a light allergy is like being irritated and itchy and stuff like that. And as well, if you're a magic user in Shadowrun, particularly if you're a healer, you might find it very difficult to heal people who have a lot of cybernetics, because the more cybernetics you get, the more of your soul kind of dies, and you can't get... And there isn't anything in Shadowrun you can do to get bits of your soul back. They're always gone once you do that. So characters who have a lot of cybernetics and a lot of cyberware aren't as easily healed by magic as by, say, conventional medicine.
Or presumably by repair if they get cybernetic enough.
Yeah, that's true, yeah. You know, and you can sometimes have these very odd characters who are deathly allergic to iron, but are, like, mostly cyborg. And, yeah, it's a very interesting setting, and I do like the way that Shadowrun plays around with it, because it's how much you want to play around with it, and it isn't just, like... And I can understand people's anxiety towards magic and magical things in Shadowrun, because they weren't always there. It's a new thing, magic.
I do like that Shadowrun does that as a way of, like, basically flipping the entire conflict on its head, in that this time, like, technology still advances, but technology is the old familiar thing, whereas magic is the new scary thing that's advancing too fast.
Yeah. So it's very interesting in that aspect, and with tabletop games, it always depends how much the GM wants to play up magic versus technology, if it's a core trope, message, theme in the game.
One thing I honestly feel that if you're going to run into this trope, you have to do is you have to erect some kind of cultural or educational barrier between engineering and sorcery.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, then those two things would never have evolved separately at all. As it was, like, the early natural philosophers tried a whole load of ridiculous shit because they didn't know what worked. Like, you remember Isaac Newton was at least partially convinced that maybe alchemy was a thing. Possibly.
Yeah.
Like, turning base metals into precious metals. I mean, it's not certain, but it might be. Let's give it a go. So, a lot of times, like... There's a lot of magic where it's like, if the magic is real, then scientists would know about it. Like, because it's only the magic not being real that's put them off that track in our world.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot... Because basically they're just, like, trying to find ways to advance, and they don't particularly care about, like, what the aesthetic of the particular advances they're trying to make are.
Yeah.
So, if you're going to have magic versus technology, first of all, they have to work differently. And second of all, there needs to be, like, in all honesty, the more high magic your setting gets, the more difficult this becomes. And not just because of that, but also because the more high magic your setting gets, the more likely that any fight between magic and technology will be won by magic. Because, like, magic just breaks the criteria on which technology has to function.
Yeah.
So magic will literally always win. Now, sometimes you will come across cases where, like, a medium level magic setting has magic be unpredictable enough that the consistency of technology is its strength, and you could do something there. But honestly, like, I don't know, like, I'm trying to avoid, like, giving DM advice based on my personal opinion, because obviously if you want to do this trope in your game because you think that the underlying theme is important, or because you just like having that particular duality to split people off into magical characters and technological characters, fine. But I honestly think a setting is a lot more fun if you basically allow those things to be combined. Because it's like... think of like all of the problems that are facing our technology currently. And think about how many of those problems are like... basically, if this particular constraint did not exist, we would be able to make this kind of technology. And it's like, there's a whole lot of things like... what's something? There's a lot of things to do with like power. Like, we can't get enough power, or we can get enough power but not fast enough. And it's like, if you had a way of addressing some of those problems in a way that just allowed you to ignore physics, to ignore chemistry or biology, to just, in a very limited way, bend reality to your will, to force a solution that otherwise nearly works, you'd fucking do it. Especially if you were aiming for, like, actually producing the thing in question. Because capitalism. Like, capitalism would be all over using magic to fix holes in engineering.
Oh, hell yeah.
Like, of course, that would still depend on, like, the danger... No, to be honest, it would not depend on the danger level of the magic. I'm talking out of my arse. Like, there would be government regulations on how much magic you're allowed to put in something, but really, like, they would find ways around that. They'd be like, well, you know, like, enchantment isn't the same as ambient magic. It's safer. Probably.
Yeah, that's true.
Provided you don't break the thing and let all the magic out. Don't give this toy to children under 3 because they might become changelings or something. We don't know, we're not liable.
I love it. That would be... That's... yeah.
I mean, the biggest problem is it does change the aesthetic of what you're going for in the setting.
Yeah.
And I acknowledge that. I'm like, if there's a particular aesthetic that you want to go for, where like the arcane knowledge of the elderly and of the like well-trained is conflicting with the new, exciting, consistent technology that is coming out of some kind of industry, or if you want to flip those things around, like in Shadowrun. Although, honestly, I feel that in a good number of cases you could just play Shadowrun.
Yeah, just play Shadowrun.
But if you want to do those things, that's fine. It's just... I don't particularly like those settings.
Yeah. This is it, because I've been actually thinking about Steven Universe for the past few minutes, although I'm always kind of thinking about Steven Universe.
As am I. This is probably just like going to slowly morph into a Steven Universe podcast, where like we devote a third of our examples to each of our worlds, and then a third is just Steven Universe.
Steven Universe. Anyway, so we have sort of the gems on Earth, and obviously their technology is... Spoilers if you haven't seen any of Steven Universe. In fact, if you haven't seen any of Steven Universe, pause the podcast right now and watch all of the episodes.
They are like 11 minutes long, and you will have a pretty good grounding by the end of Season 1. Season 2 has a lot of new exciting stuff in it, but I don't know if a huge amount of it, as of yet, is particularly relevant to your understanding. And of course, like, because we're recording the podcast now, as long as that holds true, it won't be, because we can't, like, go into the future and find out stuff that will be revealed later and then come back and spoil it in the podcast, because that would be weird.
Oh man, I wish we could, though. Could you imagine the power?
No, let's not do that!
Anyway.
That'd be horrible.
Anyway. So, the gems on sort of Earth are less scientifically advanced, and I think for a long time we probably thought they were magical. And that their powers were derived from magic. The more you get into the series, the more you realise that it's science fiction, and the more you realise that this is technology. It's just old technology.
And it's like very much the aesthetic that's masking it. There's that. I'm honestly quite surprised that we've been recording for like 50 minutes at this point, and we have not yet brought up that fucking Arthur C. Clarke quote.
What's the what quote?
Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Of course, it's that quote. Yeah. Well, there you go. Like a lot of time, the aesthetics completely just cover what is magic and what is science.
Well, yeah,
you get it in
the Earth, the crystal gems technology is quite a lot of it is made of stone. There's a lot of it that has like weird inscriptions and carvings on it. A lot of it like moves around using glowing lights. It's very ephemeral. It's very ethereal. quite a lot of it is like keyed to items that we traditionally, at least in European culture, understand to have some kind of significance in sorcery and that kind of thing. So it's not like a massively it's not a massive stretch that we initially presume it to be magical, and in fact Stephen does as well.
Yeah, and then fucking
this is where the
Peridot
spoilers
shows
start,
up.
by the way.
And then fucking Peridot shows up and fucking destroys everything we've ever known about the aesthetic of Steven Universe, and it's just like, we're aliens from another planet, we're not magical beings at all, and here's a giant spaceship shaped like a hand.
It's like
that uses...
very obviously robotic, and it contains like force fields and like Star Trek doors and shit like that. And it's like, oh, homeworld technology is much more advanced now, and it looks like technology.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting way to take that. You know?
Yeah, but I think that's very typical of... Steven Universe has this really strong anime aesthetic occasionally. And I think I touched upon this a couple of episodes ago, last episode, where I was talking about like anime sci-fi, where I was really talking about Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball Z, but particularly Sailor Moon, because in the manga of Sailor Moon, they're kind of, they're all from the moon. They're all aliens from other planets, essentially, is the idea. They're princesses from other planets. And they have all this sort of magical technology. And then, like, straight up, at the end of the first arc, Luna, the talking cat, is like, oh, come on, let's go down to the command center. And underneath the arcade, I'm not even shitting you, there is like a NASA-esque, like, space control center, where, like, they just go down. And I was, like, reading the manga at this point, having only ever watched the anime, and I was like, this completely destroys all of the aesthetic of Sailor Moon. Also, why has the cat never talked about this place before then? And I was like, because, like, the anime really tries to keep the kind of fantasy aesthetic going for, like, as long as possible. And you can't do that if Luna has a NASA-esque control center underneath the arcade.
Yeah, but we were talking about Steven Universe.
Yeah, Steven Universe.
We went off on that tangent, but another thing I think is that because of the target audience of the show, because Steven Universe is still a show for children, not small children, but like tweens and up.
Yeah, I don't know. I know quite a few like 7-8-year-olds who enjoy Steven Universe.
Oh, yeah,
so.
I mean, like, it holds a lot of appeal. I don't know if they're necessarily the target demo, but the point is, when you're making a show with that particular target audience, there's really no shame in like very strong, like, the theming equivalent of block colors. Yeah. For instance, one of the visual cues that they use a lot is characters gaining stars in their eyes when they are excited or impressed or in some kind of anticipation. It's mainly Stephen who does it, but if you look closely, Pearl and Greg also do it.
Yeah, and
Rose does
of course
it too.
Rose does it, yes. Or Rose did it because she's dead now.
Shh.
That's not a spoiler. You go into the show knowing that.
Yes, but I'm like, there's so much that we're just bringing up that's like tangentially related, and it'll make me harder to edit the podcast.
She dead.
Yeah.
Anyway, she dead.
Well, sort of.
Yeah.
But so I think in that particular case, if we can haul this back to the original point we were making before we just started randomly talking about Steven Universe and its anime inspirations, is it makes sense then to make the old Gemtech, which is supposed to be less advanced, look very arcane compared to the new Gemtech, which has an aesthetic that's very much closer to what we associate with modern technology. Because then, even though that doesn't necessarily make sense in Clarkian models of advanced technology, it's an immediate visual cue as to this. If we assume this is all technology, this is more advanced than this.
Yeah.
Anyway, in role-playing games, which is what this podcast is about, you can use... maybe magic and technology are not, in and of themselves, particularly important to whatever it is that you happen to be doing. I feel like maybe in World of Darkness you could pull this off, or some other like system where like it's pretty modern and pretty familiar, where you could have things look magical or look technological, depending on what sort of because that's half the thing, isn't it? Like this is half the point, is that it's not necessarily that technology and magic are even that incompatible. It's just that they represent different aesthetics.
Yeah.
There's different theming going on. Like, I know that D&D has, like, pushed gnomes very hard into artifice.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think that's really just as much to do with gnomes being kind of useless otherwise as it is with, like, other stuff.
They don't exist in my setting. That's how brutal I went. I went, no, Dungeons and Dragons, gnomes are not a thing. But totally allowed Dragonborn.
I allowed gnomes, but they come from the same country as tieflings. So they're, like, really far away and there's not a lot of them.
We put the gnomes over there. Yeah.
Although, to be honest, you've, like, met both. So they spread out a bit.
Yeah. No. I like the gnome characters we've met, so it's okay.
But like that's half the problem, is that there's a very and Pathfinder, I think, is a good example of what happens if you don't keep check of this. If you're like, okay, I don't really want to restrict those things, so let's just let those two aesthetics do their thing. Like, you look at the like default settings of Pathfinder, and it's fucking hideous. There's all this like different mishmash of like different time periods, fashions, and technologies and cultural attitudes all like rammed together into one big mush, and it's kind of gross.
Yeah. Like a big undercooked shepherd's pie.
No. Not like that at all. So I guess what I'm saying is, I think, do whatever you want. Basically, this whole podcast is me saying I don't personally like magic versus technology as a trope because I think it's overdone, it's no longer culturally relevant, and it restricts a lot of otherwise is very fun stuff that you could do with the interaction between those two forces in a setting. So if you wanted, based on me giving those reasons, to make a setting where those two things interact a lot, I would be happy about that. But that's still my opinion, and at the end of the day, if you want to do magic versus technology as a trope because you like its aesthetic or its like thematic meaning, or you just can't really establish a marriage between magic and technology that isn't ludicrously overpowered, so you have to split them up, fine, go and do that.
Cool. Yeah. Just, if you want to make magic as an aesthetic and technology as an aesthetic fight each other, you go do that. And honestly, if you're going to do that as like a source of inspiration, I would strongly recommend you watch Steven Universe. Because it does those two aesthetics fighting very well. They
do fight. Both of them are science, so I question whether Beth has your best interests at heart or just wants you to watch Steven Universe. I do as well.
It's both. It is in your best interests to watch Steven Universe.
I feel she's probably lying, but I'm not going to like back that up because I also want you to watch Steven Universe.
So we've covered much in this podcast: Harry Potter, Power Rangers, Steven Universe, Sailor Moon, Dungeons and Dragons, Shadowrun, Arcanum.
Very briefly, the World of Darkness, which I feel like I would talk more about if I knew exactly how Mage the Awakening and Mage the whatever the fuck the new one is handle conflicts between magic and technology. Although, I remember when I played Mage the Awakening, I was allowed to use, like, whichever of the magics it is that allows you to, like, look back in time. I was able to do that with my phone, which I thought was cool.
That's really cool,
and, like, there is actually an entire faction in Mage the Awakening, and I believe in the newer Mage as well, assuming that Mage the Awakening is the older Mage, as I believe it is, called the Virtual Adepts. And indeed another one who are based on, like, engineers. So, like, there is a capacity for the combination of magic and technology. And I pretty much always play a Virtual Adept, because I love the Virtual Adepts. They're such a good idea. This idea that, like... No, you know what? Read Neil Gaiman's American Gods. Because if you want an insight into, like, pretty much the ultimate marriage of these two concepts, the idea that old magic, in the terms of the power attributable to folklore, is the same thing as technology, then you will find an explanation to that in Neil Gaiman's American Gods, which is also actually just a really good Neil Gaiman book. Although I would probably say that because it is basically the only Neil Gaiman book I've ever read. I'm going to read The Ocean at the End of the Lane and Anansi Boys at some point, but I don't read a lot of books.
Are you ever going to read Good Omens? That's the real question.
I don't know, maybe.
You should probably read Good Omens, like...
Anyway, that's not relevant.
I mean, it's just a good book.
Read American Gods.
Read American Gods.
Because... I mean, stick with it. The bit I'm talking about happens like maybe 2/3 of the way through the book, where suddenly you'll realize that, like, at least in that universe, but also like generally thematically, you can have it that getting magic and technology to fight is ridiculous because, as Arthur C. Clarke alluded, they are literally the same thing. They are the same continuum. And like, even if you go back to the natural philosophers, there was always the strong chance that depending on what turned out to be real, they would be the same thing.
I mean, I've always been interested in how it affects characters who are magical, very much like in Shadowrun with, the allergies to, stuff that we would consider very normal and stuff that's in almost everything. I remember reading a book called Half Bad by Sally Green. It's a very good book, I would recommend it. And there are essentially two groups of magical users. There are white witches and black witches, or dark witches. And white witches have no problem at all interacting with modern technology, but black witches do. They can't be around modern technology. It makes their head feel funny. They get headaches. They can't sleep inside. They have to sleep outdoors because they need to be around nature more often. And I found that really interesting how some people just couldn't, maybe some magic users can't use technology because it interferes with them on a level. It's like it interferes with their biology almost. I find that very interesting.
Well, yeah, maybe you could have the idea that, like, not all of the kinds of magic in your world interact badly with technology, but some of them do. Like, druids, for instance, probably going to need to be around nature a lot, so maybe they can use technology, but not a huge amount.
Yeah.
But, like, some examples of ways that you could combine magic with technology for something cool. Bards who make electronic music.
Ah, sick. I already love that idea.
It's so good.
Do it!
Tune bards. Come on. And, like, basically the virtual adepts from Mage, to be honest. I really, really love the virtual adepts. I think they exemplify that idea that magic and new technologies don't necessarily have to be, like, opposing forces.
Yeah.
So, virtual adepts, Arthur Weasley, and Arthur C. Clarke are the people we feel that you should listen to on this case.
Yeah. What exactly is the function of a rubber duck?
I mean, I feel Harry could probably have answered that question, but...
Could he have, though? Because I don't know the function of a rubber duck. I don't know how rubber ducks work. Mind you, I don't know how rivers work.
It's true, she doesn't.
I really don't. I have no shame in admitting that whatsoever. I didn't take GCSE geography. Right. I didn't pay attention during core geography ever.
Like you can't just have it like cut right through a continent. That's not.
Well, it does. It does.
But then it's not a river. Then it's just like two continents really close together, or at least like a canal.
All right then, it's a canal.
Well,
what
not
more
even
do you
canal.
want?
Like it's not a canal. It's whatever the Panama Canal was.
All right then.
Which it was a canal, but it was also like it cut North America off from South America. It's
quite clearly just a really big river, and you have to deal with it, Alex. But I don't know what to tell you.
Rivers are fresh water, and they flow from high places down into the sea. It's not just like a river cuts from the sea through to the sea.
Maybe it does. Maybe it does. Maybe I'm just bad at drawing maps, Alex. Maybe I'm bad at drawing maps. Have you ever considered that?
See, this is important to me because in this particular context, my character is trying to sail up this river, and if the river is like going in both directions from a water source in the middle, that's going to be bad for him because then he can't sail his boat up it. I feel that's probably us.
Yeah, it's probably us.
So, this has been House of Bards.
Mm-hmm.
I have been Alex.
And I've been Beth. You can contact me at Baroness Bamf, and that's both on Tumblr and on Twitter.
I, on Tumblr and Twitter, am Cleaver Crumish, so that is Clever Crumb Bish. And you could also contact us by using the hashtag House of Bards. That is all one word on Twitter, but feel free to split it up in other places. The intro and outro music is by Kevin MacLeod, and I will put a credit for the background art in the video description and in the description of any other place that this is posted with that art. Feel free to contact us with your comments on the podcast. Anything from praise to criticism to new topics that we could do. We are especially looking for new topics to do. We do still have some in the tank, but we're getting like right down to the ones that are like really cool ideas, but difficult to pull off. There are some that involve like getting a guest on the show, and there's the one where we just basically talk D&D stories at you for an hour, which I want to do, but Beth thinks would be better with somebody else on the podcast as well.
Yeah.
I feel like maybe that one would go on long enough that we might be able to cut it up into like 2 podcasts, which would be helpful to me because at some point I do want to go home and see my parents.
That's true. Yeah. Well.
But
yeah.
All in all, if you take nothing from this podcast, take from the idea that you don't have to have magic and technology as diametrically opposed concepts just because that's what you've seen. It doesn't have to happen. It will be fine. Experiment with how those things work in your world, because there are a lot more imaginative ideas that you can get going with, especially in an interactive medium like role-playing games.
You are the master of your own story, both literally and figuratively.
And we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
You could also do that in your role-playing games, which this podcast is about.
Yeah, it's not really. It's about Steven Universe, but
honestly,
continue.
I feel like we could maybe just do a Steven Universe podcast.
What would it even be about? Would it just be like Steven Universe rewatch or what? I don't.
I am honestly fine with doing like Steven Universe rewatch.
Okay, cool.
But
Steven Universe rewatch.
We don't currently have the time, but that's something I would actually really like to do.
Yeah.
Cool.
Steven Universe rewatch coming to a House of Bards sub playlist near you.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah.
It's not off the table, is what I'm saying.
It'd get more views than this, to be fair. If we just want to go full capitalist, we could put ads on it and everything. We could make T-shirts. Amazing. We could become true
I don't really want to
bourgeois scum.
I don't know if I would want to like merchandise our
podcast
of Steven Universe because of the implication that Rebecca Sugar might like come to my house in the middle of the night and stare mournfully through my window at me until I felt incredibly guilty about what I did.